This is episode 9 of Field Target Tech. I'm Tom Holland, and today we're going to talk about reading the wind a little bit. I'm not going to talk too much on what the effect of the pellet is in the wind. That will be to an individual the way his setup is. It's going to depend on your speed, your caliber, the distance you're shooting at, the weight of your projectile. There's a whole bunch of things involved in that aspect, so we're not going to get into really where you should hold or how you should hold for certain winds. We're going to determine, what I'm going to help you guys try to figure out is narrow down on how you can tell how fast the wind is blowing and which direction it's coming from, which is very, very important. With those two things, if you have a ballpark figure, you can learn what your pellet and what your particular equipment does in the wind. Now, if this is the target, and you're shooting here from this position, sighted in with zero wind, the pellet's going to go right down the middle and into your target, into the center. Now, if the wind is coming from the right, you will have to compensate and aim to the right at some point. Again, all your guns are going to be different because of calibers and speeds and all of that. You'll have to aim more to the right because the wind is going to blow the pellet back into the center. Same thing with the wind coming from the other way. You'll have to aim into the wind to curve so that the wind blows it back into the target, and you'll have to aim off to the left side of the target. That would be called a full value wind. Winds that come from different angles, again, depending on every gun, it's going to be different, and it's going to be a different value. So you guys, there's no substitute showing on a board or anything of shooting in the wind. Shooting the wind, that's the only way you're going to get good at it. I see so many guys at the range going, oh, it's windy, I'm going to quit, I'm going to walk away. And then they go into a match when there's wind and they don't know what to do because they didn't practice in the wind. You look at some of the better shooters like Greg Salve and Harold Rushton and a lot of the guys on the U.S. team, they live to shoot in the wind. And they practice in the wind a lot because when you go to a different place, a different range you've never been to, you have to expect the unexpected. And sometimes the unexpected will be zero wind and a lot of mirage. Other times it'll be a 30-mile-an-hour wind that no matter what you do, you can't figure out how to compensate for that. There's no excuse for shooting in the wind. So shoot in the wind every chance you get, and you'll get better at reading the wind. But generally that's what a pellet does in the wind. Now, how can we tell which way the wind is coming from? How do you tell if it's coming from this way or not this way? Well, there's ways you can do, there's things you can do to look at in the fields to determine that. Look at the way grass is blowing around. Look at a butterfly or see what maybe bugs are doing, some very small gnats in some situations. Like I said, butterflies. Watch the way a leaf falls off a tree or the way the trees sway. And you can tell pretty much what direction the wind will be coming from. Now, there's also some other ways of telling which way the wind is coming from, as well as the speed of the wind. I'm going to wipe this out real quick. And one of the ways you can tell, knock the thing off the wall. One of the ways you can tell is by looking through your scope at the target and seeing what the Mirage does. Now, if you're shooting at a far target, you want to look closer, at a closer target out of focus, because that's when you'll see the Mirage the most. If you focus at 50 and you see a Mirage further in back of that, that's not going to help you very much because that's already way past the target and it could be a lot further out there than you think. So if you focus at 50 and look at a 40-yard target and you see some sort of a Mirage, you can determine what the wind is doing. Now, if the Mirage just kind of goes up kind of straight and just wavers a little bit like that, just pretty much straight up, you can pretty much speculate that the wind is doing somewhere between less than 1 or 2 miles an hour, if at all. Now, once you see the Mirage starting to go up and then drift one way a little bit like that, and you see it starting to waver, you could say, okay, I'm in the 3 to 6 mile an hour range or so, depending. You know, again, it depends on the distance you're at and what you're looking at. But if that lays over even more, the further over it goes, you can figure out what the value is. If it goes straight up, it's probably less than 1 or 2 miles an hour, if at all. And it lays over maybe about 5 or 10 degrees. It's worth maybe about 3 to 6 miles an hour. If it lays over more, it's between 5 and 7. Once the Mirage lays all the way over where the waves are almost straight and it's not boiling anymore, the waves are almost straight, that's going to be a wind that's probably between 12 and 15 miles an hour or greater. The problem is determining, is that 15 miles an hour or is it 25 miles an hour? Because those, when it flatlines like that, it's going to look the same in any wind that's higher than 12 to 15 miles an hour. So under 12 to 15 miles an hour, this is a good method to figure out what the speed of the wind is, as well as the direction. Obviously, if these lines go the other direction, it indicates a wind coming from right to left instead of left to right, just the way I have this drawn. It works alternately both ways. There's some other ways that you can tell, and I'll get into that in a second. Okay, some of the other natural things that you can look at in a field or an area where you'll be shooting is what the things do around you with the wind to determine the speed of the wind. Here you have, as I have written here, if you have smoke, there's a smokestack around, maybe there's some factories or something, or maybe there's a restaurant around, it's got some smoke coming up around it, and it's going straight up. Usually the wind is underneath 1 mile an hour. Now, if the direction of the smoke starts to wander in one way or the other, and leaves start to move on the trees, it's between 1 and 3 miles an hour, roughly. This is just a general guide. If you can feel the wind on your face, it's somewhere between 4 to 7 miles an hour. Tree leaves are moving along, and there's some debris, some small debris gets blown intermittently along your path to target. It's 8 to 12 miles an hour, and etc. Dust kicks up with debris moving faster, 13 to 18, small dust clouds, and all of that. You can also look at, and as the wind blows, heavier branches, 25, 31, you can't stand up, it's difficult to walk, 32 plus. And usually we don't have those conditions, but usually you get conditions up to 15, 20 miles an hour. Okay, guys, once you have the wind speed and direction figured out, again, it's a hit or miss thing. You have to just experience it really to get good at doing it. I'm still not good at it. I haven't mastered it yet. Sometimes I'm good in the wind. Sometimes I'm horrible at reading the wind. You just have to spend the time out in the field to do so. Now, one thing I could say that I'm not going to say is wrong, but it's generally frowned upon in the shooting community. That's the way I was taught with small bore rifle shooting anyway. Once you're zeroed in at a particular distance, for all the distances that you shoot, you should use holdover and not start cranking your windage to account for wind. Once you start cranking your windage to account for wind, it's very easy to lose track, and then you don't know if you crank too much to the left or to the right, and your zero is off, and then you're going to have a lot more problems than what you started with. So my recommendation in the wind is leave your zero alone and just use good old Kentucky windage. Just hold a little bit over to the left or to the right, and just learn what your stuff does over time. As I said, there's no substitute for shooting in the wind than shooting in the wind. Okay, guys, we're going to use another method also to determine the speed of the wind, and it can also tell you the direction of the wind. Some ranges, particularly sighting ranges, have wind flags on them. You usually won't find that in a field target match out in the woods someplace, but at your range, at your sighting range or your practice area, usually you'll have wind flags. And depending on what the wind flag does, you can pretty much estimate the wind reasonably accurately using the 4-to-1 method. And people forget about this sometimes. The 4-to-1 method is a very simple thing to use, and we're going to show that in a second. Picture these as all flag poles or whatever, and the little squiggly line there to the left are all the flags. Now, if your angle is 20 degrees, divide your angle of the flag by 4. Divide 20 degrees, you get 5 miles an hour. If the flag is 40 degrees from the flagpole, divide it by 4, it's 10 miles an hour. Now this is only a rough guide, and so on. 60 degree with the wind flag, 15 miles an hour, 80 degrees, leaned over, 20 miles an hour, and 100 is when the thing is flapping well above 90 and it's beyond that. It's 25 or more. So when the flag is in this condition, it's tough to figure out if it's 25 or 35 or 40. And if you have winds like that, it's a crapshoot at that point anyway. But using the angles, if you can figure that out, if you're good enough to figure out what angle that is with the flagpole, you can really determine what the speed is to some degree. That's a big help when it comes to figuring out what your solution is on how far you should hold left, right, or otherwise. I'm going to mention one other thing here about wind, and this is just a general, again, to everyone's gun, they're a little bit different. When you're aiming at your target and you're shooting from here, and that's your 0 in no wind. When you have a stronger wind from, say, the halfway point to you have a stronger wind, and you have a weaker wind to the end, when you shoot, being that the stronger wind is closer to you, it's going to affect the angle of the pellet more. It's going to blow the pellet off more from here to here than if you had a stronger wind as opposed to a weaker wind closer to you. This situation would have less effect on your pellet than this will. So the stronger the wind closer to you, the more effect it's going to have and blow this off. In this situation where the wind is weaker, up until maybe halfway, using that as an example, this line could be anywhere along here, but generally if you have a stronger wind down by the target, it won't blow the pellet off as far as it would if the wind was stronger closer to you. That's just a general statement. That's for everyone's guns. It's going to be a little bit different, like I said, and that's just a general overview on what wind does to stuff. This is just like an FYI type video, just for guys that are just starting, particularly guys that are more of a seasoned shooter that have been in it for many years. It's not a science, as we all know. It's sometimes really a hit or miss thing. So get out there in the wind and practice in the wind, and there's no substitute for that. That's the best way to learn what your stuff does in the wind. Other than that, I don't have my parts yet to rebuild my Marauder and put a new barrel on it and everything, and the regulator. So that project is going to be on hold for a couple of weeks. I have my indoor nationals with my crossbow competitions coming up. So the next 3 weeks is going to be a little bit rushed to get my stuff in line for that for the end of February. So I don't know if there's going to be another video next week or the week after, because I do have a lot on my plate right now. So if you guys can just like and subscribe down below, you guys shoot me some emails and stuff. I'm getting a lot of good feedback. Send me an email and we'll talk about it another time. You guys have any ideas at all, shoot me some messages, and we'll try to do and accommodate you guys in the future. Other than that, this is Field Target Tech number 9, and I'm Tom Holland, and I'll see you next time.